oportunidad de presentar a Terrell Carver es profesor del Departamento de Sociología de Teoría Política de la Universidad de Bristol, es graduado de la Universidad de Oxford. Sus estudios están calzados básicamente sobre la obra de Marx y Engels, aunque él tiene una interpretación sobre esta obra desde un punto de vista, digamos, más bien textual, hermenéutico, no tanto desde el punto de vista de la teoría clásica, ¿no? Sobre lo cual se exige mucho. Y además también ha realizado estudios sobre la sociología de las masculinidades, ¿no? Las teorías de género. Esa es un poco, digamos, una presentación muy somera de lo que es Terrell, que tiene casi 300 volúmenes escritos sobre Marx y Engels en Berlín, así que realmente tenemos un especialista, una persona, digamos, para aprovecharlo realmente. Es un lujo tenerlo acá. Bueno, él es invitado a este congreso por la SAP, la Sociedad Argentina de Análisis Político, y la Universidad Nacional de Cuyo. Y a su vez, digamos, en su filiación institucional, él es miembro del Comité, digamos, de Relaciones Internacionales de la IPSA, de la PSA, que vendría a ser lo que es la SAP a nivel del Reino Unido, y también del Comité Ejecutivo de IPSA, la Asociación Internacional. Así que bueno, empiezo esta presentación. Él va a hablar en inglés, no sé si alguno tiene dificultad o necesita que haya una traducción o va bien. No, va bien. Listo. Y si, bueno, para las preguntas también, si alguna pregunta necesita una traducción, también lo hacemos. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Pablo. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here as a guest of SAP. And I bring greetings from the Political Studies Association of the United Kingdom. I apologize for not speaking in Spanish, but I'm sure Pablo can help when we get to questions. So I will explain about this 2-volume production just recently published. You have the publicity. It's very expensive, so maybe your library or your research institute can buy copies. I'm presenting these two to SAP, but I get a discount, 40%. I will tell the story out of the books, and there is also a detailed presentation of the contents and the relationship to political theory tomorrow, if you'd like to come, which has more pictures. There's just one today. You may not recognize them, but they are Marx and Engels watching over us. And I chose these images, which are rarely seen, because they are within 2 or 3 years of writing what has become known as the German ideology. So when they did this writing of these manuscripts, they looked more like that. That is a revolutionary sort of necktie, and they were quite young, not the grey beards that you're used to. And they don't look like famous theorists or philosophers because they weren't. They were political activists and agitators. So you will see why it's important to evoke this spirit when I talk about the contents of these 2 books. Well, why are there 2 books? This was the publisher's idea. I thought it could be 1 book, but they thought it was too big. However, there is a clear distinction in the books in terms of what is going on. So, the first book is based on a PhD dissertation done by my graduate student, Daniel Blanco. And he is German. He arrived, he wanted to write a dissertation on the philosopher Max Stirner, who is sort of famous. And I thought that was not going to be a very interesting project. So I had a suspicion that there was a political history to the book that we see on the shelf as the German ideology. Not the political history of writing it, but the political history of the book, which was first published in 1932 as a complete transcription of famously untidy, messy, illegible manuscripts. So the book that you see first appeared in 1932. It was not published by Marx and Engels, but I did not know anything. I mean, maybe there was no political history to this. It was just a suspicion. This is a way of saying that research starts with not knowing something and not knowing if there's anything to know. So it wasn't planned, and it turned out to be quite surprising and quite shocking. We had no idea what we were getting into. So this first volume was based on his dissertation, and the way we worked together on his dissertation. Most of it is his, but it was my idea. Okay. And we worked together very carefully on it. So what happens is that the political history begins with the construction of the book in the 1920s so that it can be published in German in 1932. Pablo has read my work and has kindly said that it's, what is interesting or good about it is that it goes beyond the obvious. So it is obvious that there is a book called The German Ideology by Marx and Engels and nobody else. And it is obvious that it has a chapter on Feuerbach, Ludwig Feuerbach, the famous philosopher. And we are informed and told it is obvious that this chapter is the most important exposition of the materialist interpretation of history. Excuse me. And that this is an important moment in political science, and that it derives from a philosophical critique undertaken by Marx with a little help from Engels, not very much, of the philosopher Feuerbach, who had earlier criticized the philosopher Hegel. So it is a story of philosophy solving a scientific problem so that we have the truth about human history. That is supposed to be obvious, and it has been made obvious since 1932. When we got into the political history, the surprise and the shock is the political history is not completely scholarly. About 99% of it is obviously political. It is to do with the Russian Revolution, the revolutions in Germany, Stalinism, Nazism, World War II, the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the regimes in the East, and quite a lot to do with subsequent politics in Germany. And this, you can see this in the different translations and editions, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever, there are a lot, that reproduce what has emerged through these processes. So the story starts in 1921 with David Borisovich Ryazanov, who is a Russian scholar, activist, Bolshevik. 1921 is the middle of the Civil War, the European, the Allied invasion of Russia. It is year of revolutionary events in Germany. Okay, it is quite confused, difficult, people are starving to death, etc. Riazonov says the most important thing for us now is to collect all the works of Marx and Engels and make a scholarly edition of them in all the original languages. This is a pretty surprising thing to propose in 1921. So how is this going to happen? Bolsheviks want copies of the Communist Manifesto and things like that in Russian, and the last thing someone wants really is people working on a pile of manuscripts that nobody thinks are important. In fact, hardly anyone knows that they exist. But Riazonov and his colleagues in Germany, in the Communist Party of Germany, work together, and Riazonov makes a speech in Moscow in 1921 in Russian, and says, I have made a great discovery. These manuscripts are important. They provide the key to the materialist interpretation of history, which we've all been looking for. And it's important. This occurs in a chapter 1 on Feuerbach. Okay. So please give me money for this research. So because he announces there will be a great discovery, his institute is approved, becomes the Institute of Marxism, Leninism, and it has German colleagues in Berlin and Frankfurt. Okay, and they work together on this project and begin other projects of a similar character. So if you're interested in the 1844 manuscripts, Chaos manuscripts, Alienation, that's transcription process starts at the same time, and they are also published in 1932. So it's quite surprising that all this happens in the middle of 2 civil wars and everything else that's going on. So 1923, this speech is published in German and causes a sensation. Engels' biographer says there's no discovery here. It's all by Engels anyway. We all knew it was there, and it's not very important. Franz Mehring, Marx's biographer, had already said, these are not very good manuscripts. They're not interesting. In fact, they are quite boring. Engels looked at these manuscripts in 1883 when he was writing Ludwig Feuerbach and the End of Classical German Philosophy, because other people were talking about Feuerbach at the time. He was actually writing a book review of someone's book. He said, we didn't really know anything when we wrote these manuscripts. They're not useful. He said what is useful are the theses on Feuerbach, which he apparently never seen before, found in the box, but they're nothing to do with German ideology. So nobody liked these manuscripts themselves. 1923, 1924, Riazonov publishes this chapter 1 in Russian only as a translation. That's picked up in New York and translated into English as the materialist interpretation of history. So already we have a framing there about what this chapter is supposed to be about and why it's important. After that, we get 1932, when all manuscripts, not just this first chapter, are published and the story starts. But by 1932, Riazonov had been disappeared into the gulags and the camps. So what unfolds after that, and I don't have time to go through it all, is a story about how this book and this chapter circulated in different editions. There were actually two editions in 1932, different set of scholars worked on it. And a kind of scholarly controversy developed not just about the contents and where exactly the secret of the materialist interpretation of history is, but are the manuscripts in the right order? Have we got them transcribed correctly? How can we explain what's going on? And if you look at any edition carefully, you can see that there are places where the editors are explaining these manuscripts are discontinuous, or directing you to sections that are crossed out, or otherwise trying to explain the very rough character of what is supposed to be very good. So throughout these political events, the book is produced again and re-edited again and explained again, with wildly different stories as to where exactly the secret is and what it is and how exactly the philosophy works. But underneath, there is, we're not really quite sure which pages of the manuscript discussion go where. So scholars have a lot of fights over how to order these manuscripts. And eventually, scholars and historians, through correspondence and looking at things carefully, and some more pages are discovered in the 1960s, begin to build up a historical picture, which makes some of us more and more suspicious about what is going on in this book with the famous first chapter. So, as is usual in reception studies, we have an object, a book, which is what it is. And then we talk about how it's received or interpreted or re-edited all down the line. But as we trace this political history, we also find there's more and more difficulties saying what the object is, what it is, in the first place. So, as this history unfolds, we have to look back to what was going on in the 1840s. And what was going on in the 1840s was a lot of writing, pamphlets, manuscripts with other people, like Engels and Marx, to criticize contemporary philosophers, Bruno Bauer, Max Skinner, and Carl Gruen. I mean, these are not well-known people now. But they had difficulties with their colleagues, difficulties finding publishers, so they started writing and got interested in something else, stopped, put some pages aside, started another project, got a different publisher, involved other people, oops, that doesn't work, and went through that process about 3 times. So almost nothing was published in 1845-6 when they were writing. They then, as is famously said, just abandoned it, they just left it. Okay. So it is a heap of unfinished works, but nobody ever knew what it was supposed to be. These were collaborative collections of essays, and they'd already done one, the Deutsche Französische Jahrbücher, which involved other people, so it's more like an edited volume or a special number of a journal or something like that. But it never had a title. None of these projects had a title. They talked about, we'll talk about Bruno Bauer, and then we'll talk about Carl Gruen, or the other way around, or the true socialists are more interesting. I mean, they basically fill the box with scribbling, but it never actually went anywhere, and it wasn't clear what they were trying to do, because they kept changing their minds about what they were trying to do. So there never was a German ideology book, even as an idea. The title, there is no title for any of this in any of the manuscripts. Moreover, they only got interested in Feuerbach at the end of this process because it was said he was going to write something new, and the other people they were really interested in got interested in Feuerbach. So in the Feuerbach chapter, as you see it, there's really nothing about Feuerbach, sadly. And people have kind of realized that. It's about Feuerbachian ideas and people interested in that. But they're actually not writing a Feuerbach chapter. They decided to write something about Feuerbach, and they wrote, actually Marx wrote, 3 pages. Each one says introduction and Feuerbach. So they never actually, they said, oh, let's start, they got interested in something else. So we only have 3 fragments of this chapter. But what was it going to be? They were not writing the materialist interpretation of history. They were developing a conception of history and human activity that was different from these other people, Bauer and Stoner and Carver and people like that. And they kind of say some nice things about Feuerbach, but he's kind of like not really important. The important thing is they are attacking philosophy. And they're attacking philosophy with essentially economic type history. And they do it very successfully. But they're not writing a philosophical critique which has a philosophical solution to a philosophical riddle or problem. That's all set out by Engels, although not in conjunction with these manuscripts. What they're doing is writing political pamphlets against people who think they know about politics. So the shocking discovery, if you like, is that there never was a book. It didn't have this first chapter. The first chapter isn't, what we've got doesn't really link Feuerbach to this materialist interpretation of history at all. There is no secret. And they left it and went on to other things. So if you're really interested in what they're trying to do, Marx's Poverty of Philosophy is where he was going, because it's his book attacking a very famous politician, Proudhon, a socialist agitator and politician, in more or less the same way, saying it's too philosophical. So you've actually got a view here. There's not so much economic as praxis, or we learn and understand things through doing things, through practical activities, not through reading Hegel and Feuerbach, a philosopher guy having a great thought. They're really quite against that. So it's very ironic that in the 1880s and 1920s they get turned into famous philosophers. And it doesn't actually fit them at all. So that's what goes on in that book. What's going on in this book, there, which looks much bigger, but actually isn't. What's going on in this book is saying, okay, let's go back to this box full of manuscripts, which does exist in Amsterdam. It's very hard to get in to look at them, but I have touched the sacred manuscripts. Okay, they are falling to pieces. And what's in the box is a certain amount, quite a lot of what's called fair copy, actually quite nice written out stuff, but it's all of this sarcastic mockery about and Pablo and all these people that don't like. What's also in Fox are much rougher pieces that they pulled out, which they didn't actually want when the fair copy was made. So essentially, it's a trash can. Okay. There is wastebasket stuff, right? So it's the wastebasket stuff that we as sort of put together as the Feuerbach chapter, because there is no fair copy Feuerbach chapter, even assuming they were really going to write one. And chapter is kind of the wrong word, it's kind of episode. All right? So, when you actually look at this collection of trash cans, you find out that, as you would expect in a trash can, it's different pieces done at different times, just accumulated together. And it's very, very messy. I'll show some slides of it tomorrow. It has all kinds of cartoons and scribbles and dirty jokes and all kinds of stuff on it. Some of it's upside down. It's very hard to read. You can see each handwriting, because the handwriting is quite different. And what's good about these things is they are so rough, because we don't have any other record of how they work together. Because all the rest of the time they emptied the trash can. Or Mrs. Marx emptied the trash can. Somebody emptied the trash can. So if you actually get this stuff out and get it transcribed, what's really interesting are two things. One is who is writing what and what is their relationship, which isn't always agreement. Sometimes they debate and contradict and make jokes to each other and things like that. And what can you learn from just literally seeing what they cross out and how they change one word to another? Now, the latest transcription goes for what's called the smooth text at the last hand. So you don't see different handwriting, you don't see what's crossed out. All gone. But it makes it easy to read, but it's trash can. Okay. So what I've tried to do is to put the trash can into English and to put on this page crossing out and what's above the line and below the line. And so you're going to make the handwriting difference clear. Marx is in bold and Engels is in ordinary Roman type, so that you can actually follow the thinking. Okay, this page is for dummies. It's the smooth version, but it still has the handwriting difference in it. So there's no editing here of trying to make it a continuous discussion. It's just like, here's the first page from the trash can, and here's the next page. So some of the pages are quite short, because it's just kind of saying, here's one page and here's another page. And we know, because of Engels numbering and Marx numbering, approximately what order these things are in. So it's not complete nonsense. But because these sheets are not continuous, you are told at the top where you are on each sheet. So some of the pages end quite abruptly, because that's the end of the sheet, so they don't run along. So I've done everything I possibly can to make it look like pages from a trash can, which is more truthful to this experience. than trying to make it into a chapter of a book that was never really a book. And to get some value out of the rough quality of it, rather than throw the rough quality away. So, the introduction to this book does some analysis about changing one word to another, but it's not complete. Anyone else could possibly say something different. So I wrote about what struck me doing this. So, how has this book been received? I think some scholars like it, not very many. The ones who praise it on the publicity. The Marx Engels Gesamthaus Scholar project in Berlin hates it and won't speak to me anymore. The colleagues who are used to teaching the German ideology and assigning it to students or graduate students are furious because they don't like it either, because it's not a text that students find easy to read anymore, of course. And apparently nobody's used to reading trash can stuff. But there's a street version, you can read that. But it's not an organized discussion, because it isn't an organized discussion. It's a trash can. And people are saying, well, you gave us a trash can. I'm saying, well, I'm sorry. Not really. It's the idea that it was a chapter of a book and all of that is a fabrication. It was made up for political purposes. And it has a political life of its own right up to the present. So you can be my security bodyguard in case I'm targeted by a drone from Berlin and taken out. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm sorry, I got late, but how did you manage to get this manuscript?
Well, the story of that starts in 1932 when a German version of this is published. So we have that, and the manuscripts have, so you can follow the German. I had some access to the manuscripts, but unless you are a specialist in 19th century German handwriting, it's quite difficult. I've also had access to a digital version, which is not yet public, so you can make it bigger, which is helpful. And in 2004, there was a new transcription published in German. But it produces a smooth text of the last hand. And it has a list of what's crossed out in a completely separate volume. So it's quite hard work to go back to put the rough version together. So I worked from that. But that is itself, this is not an exact science. So this was done by German scholars who are not very much liked by the Berlin group, because they have their own internal politics to do with who was in the DDR and who was in the Bundesrepublik, or vice versa, and how that plays out. So the official volume is still awaited. I have talked to the people doing it, the ones who don't speak to me anymore. So there is this 2004, it's hard to know what to call it. It's a transcription that's somewhat more faithful to the trash can. in that rather than making a chapter out of this, it produces what's called Textzeugen, that is instances. So the 3 4-5 chapter openings are there, 1, 2, 3. But also, it's quite a miscellaneous set of things in the trash can. And they've kind of done their best to make their set of transcriptions look pretty much like the previous ones, not too different. Although they credit Josef Weidemeyer as an author, which nobody did before. So it's kind of a compromise. But it's not an exact science. So when you read something where there are things crossed out, you try to work out what was the first thought, and then their second thought when they crossed a couple of things out, and then their third thought when they made some more additions. But that's quite subjective. So what I've produced is a version of that, saying, and I've checked it in places, but not comprehensively. You need a lot of specialist people to do that. And it is ultimately subjective in terms of trying to interpret, because you're guessing at what are called Schichten, that is text layers. So it's kind of like a milkshake or a pastry with layers, something like that, or an archaeological dig to try to understand. And of course, they use a lot of abbreviations, and sometimes you can't work out what's going on. So there's guesswork, But it's, given that it's a trash can, you kind of do what you can. So in a sense, access was not that difficult. I got permission to base the English on the 2004 edition because the Gesamtausgabe project, which hates me now, fortunately sold the rights to that to De Gruyter, the publisher in Berlin. So for 1,000 euros, or 1,100 euros, 1,100 euros, okay, fine. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can 1,100 euros isn't that much. So I got permission to use it. So that is the story of access to this. But when Daniel Blanco was working on the dissertation, of course people didn't know what we were doing exactly, but he got very friendly with the lady who was the guardian of the books. Who was also German, although working in Amsterdam. And he got us permission to go and visit and look. So I particularly wanted to look for the famous mice. This was abandoned to the gnawing criticism of the mice. So in the editorial story of the edition, editors get quite creative. Oh, the mice ate something, and so they said, well, maybe it said something like this. I only found one mouse thing, maybe. But it turns out my graduate student did not want anything to do with the mice. He said it was sick. And I said, no, you find out about the European domestic mice. So apparently domestic mice don't like books very much, too fussy, so they like cheese. So, but I think there's one tiny bit that might be a mouse. I don't know. But anyway, my graduate student got very friendly with Frau Bolzer, but fortunately before she retired, and she let us have access to it. She asked him to go on a bicycling holiday with her, and he politely declined. As far as I know.
Yes, please, thank you. At the beginning of your presentation, you said there were many things taken for granted about this book. One of them was about the authors.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there are some other people involved in writing these manuscripts. For example, Moses Hess,
yes, he was.
as I believe,
yes.
Put a lot of his writing into it.
Yes, he was involved in the project although we don't have the materials. But as I say, it's going to be a collective kind of thing with different chapters by different people. And he was going to write a chapter. So he's in the correspondence when they're talking about publishers and who's going to do what, and talking about the project. And they kind of quarrel with him, and he kind of withdraws from the project. But Josef Weidemeyer was also involved, and he produced some of the fair copy. His handwriting was good. Almost all of the handwriting was endless, with just insertions and comments by Marx. I mean, some of them a few lines, but, and the Feuerbach, each page is actually Marx. Yes, I mean, it was a collective kind of project. But as with the Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch, everyone else is kind of forgotten now, because that particular collective project had 2 pieces by Marx and 1 piece by Engels, and they became famous. Other people, Arnold Brugger and various other people who contributed, are not famous anymore. So the only way you can get the whole original Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch on the Jewish question is there in the introduction to Hegel's philosophy of right. So Engels has outlines the critique of political economy, is to go to a library and get the first edition. No one's ever put it all back together. So as we find out in reception studies, reception is the way that things are made important or unimportant through time. So yes, there were other people involved. Weidemeyer also crosses out all of these manuscripts of the trash can, because he's told to copy that again into a different place, like sort of cut and paste. He was a cut and paste guy for that. But all of these editions of this so-called chapter omit those passages, which again makes nonsense of what you're trying to read on the page. So I had a magic moment where these other cutout bits are transcribed in 2004, were put somewhere in a different volume. So I actually, cut and paste and put it back where it was when they actually did the writing, because I'm interested in what they're thinking when they're writing. So you have to have everything on that page. Whereas everyone else is, what conclusions did they come to? What is the text of the last hand? Of course, there are 2 hands involved. And we don't know a lot about their thinking process. Some people like to think that Engels was taking dictation. I think that's really unlikely. I think Engels did a lot of drafting, and Marx made comments on it. So most of this comes out of Engels' head, I think, and is more like his earlier works than Marx's works. So, but they are working together. We have evidence. They're both right on the same line, and kind of finish a sentence. I mean, maybe one got up to have a beer or sort of go to the toilet or something, the other one finished. So, I mean, we think we have physical evidence they were in the same room at the same time, which isn't obvious. So we look for evidence of that. And there's a letter 40 years later that says, remember when you two were writing this, how you made all these jokes and made a big row and drank a lot of beer, late in the night. We're obviously having a good time. So that's one of the few times anyone in the big Marx Engels lifetime has any interest in this old box of stuff. What a good time we have there. It's over. We've, what do you say? We moved on. So yeah.